Te pūtake o te riri is an important, one is it's an event, but it's also an important marker, a reference point, where we can go and visit each one of these key areas that was subjected to huge violence and oppression. Te pūtake o te riri pulls together a number of elements. So firstly, the decision to locate pūtake o te riri on the 28th of October, I think is a powerful statement. For so long, te whakaputanga, te rangatiratanga o New Tireni, the Declaration of Independence, largely ignored. It never ever ignored in Taitokerau, and yet the significance of the 28th of October in the region, such as Taranaki, was always known about, but having something like this, where it can be recognised in a way of understanding that the wars weren't simply wars because Taranaki was attacked or Waikato was attacked and that violence escalated. It was all about rangatiratanga. And where is that rangatiratanga based? We trace it back to te whakaputanga rangatiratanga nei I New Tireni, to 1835. And if you think about it, we're only talking about a short 25 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the beginning of these wars, the land wars here in Taranaki and Waitara. That's one generation, from a point of recognition of rangatiratanga to the wars where the settler government that was established in 1854 then moved to extinguish that rangatiratanga. That is what the wars were about, was Māori standing up to retain the rangatiratanga that was guaranteed under the Declaration of Independence, that was recognised in the Treaty of Waitangi, that then was sought to be extinguished with the use of war, through the loss of land, through confiscation of land, and the domination of Māori by Pākehā settlers. Pūtake o te riri really only recognises one part, and that is the riri. And it's easy to look at history as a body count, as from one battle to the next battle to the next battle. Who won this battle? Why did we win it? Yet it's really easy to not recognise those who use peace. And I totally believe that in every iwi around the country, they had their advocates who were saying violence is not a way forward. Violence begets violence. Anger and hatred begets anger and hatred. That we need to find a way to be able to provide peace to our future generations. And every iwi had those leaders. We look at Tawhiao, who, a leader of peace. If we look at so many people who put their effort into parliament, who put their effort into health, put their effort into economic development for one reason, and that is to build a foundation of peace so that we can live in a equitable, in a robust and in well-being in this country. So I think we will find the other half of pūtake o te riri when we find te pūtake o te maungarongo. Pūtake o te maungarongo should naturally follow on from pūtake o te riri. Recognising the violence, the hatred and the warfare is one thing, but also recognising those aspirations for this country to live in peace. It's not about booting everyone out and saying we are now the bosses and yous aren't. It is about saying how do we actually knit an appropriate culture, identity that then recognises the people who are part of this country, and that includes Māori. Te pūtake o te maungarongo will be found in the future in our rangatahi.
Some wonderful words in the kōrero from Ruakere.
But like all traditions, that wonderful, enlightened new approach also built around itself its own almost quasi-religious aura. That if the method was objective, then so must be the people implementing the method. And that, of course, is not necessarily the case. The notion of a warrior gene as a scientific fact is actually based on the history of a scientific and cultural lie. And that is the notion of a warrior race. The warrior race suggests that there are certain races of people who were born to fight, to be violent, and to kill. It was described most graphically, I think, by one of the first English writers about our country who'd never actually visited here, but in 1830 wrote that the land is inhabited by savage, bloody warrior race, by a savage, bloody warrior race, where vengeance and war is the precious lifeblood of an ancestor bequeathed from savage father to savage son. Where did that image come from? Where did the novelist Alan Duff get the idea of naming his novel Once Were Warriors, when a clear and actually objective analysis of our society would have shown that the book could more properly have been called Once Were Gardeners, once were poets, once were singers, and if you're from Kahungunu, once and always were lovers. So where did the idea come from? When a man called Christopher Columbus set sail for India to find the quickest route to the lucrative spice markets in India, he ended up in the Caribbean. He found no spice, he found no gold, no diamonds. And so he returned to Europe empty-handed, except for a few indigenous peoples whom he had captured and took back to Spain to sell as slaves. But knowing that his life and his future adventures may be at risk, because he came back empty-handed, he did what all entrepreneurs do in that situation, I think. He lied. He said he couldn't quite reach it, but there was actually a place called El Dorado. And Dor, of course, is the Spanish word for gold, so El Dorado was a city of gold. Other countries heard about this El Dorado, and they funded adventurers to find it as well. One of them was an Englishman called Sir Walter Raleigh. He set off to find El Dorado, and he was basically given an ultimatum by Queen Elizabeth that if he didn't find it, then he would die. He didn't find it, of course, because it didn't exist. It was a fantasy. But when he returned to England, he too had to explain why he didn't find the fantasy. And so for the first time that we are aware of, the term warrior race appears in European writing. Because Walter Raleigh said in his report to the court of Queen Elizabeth that he got close to El Dorado, but was prevented from entering the city because the land was occupied by a savage warrior race who kill and eat anyone not like them. And from that one simple lie to justify a failure came the notion that all Indigenous peoples were warrior races. It puzzles me as a non-scientist how a scientist can say there is a warrior gene knowing the history of that fantasy. And when I discussed this at a conference in the United States last year, a young Mohawk scientist announced when he gave up to give the vote of thanks to me, he asked me not to worry because he was doing some research which would undoubtedly prove that people from Europe had a colonising gene. And perhaps the shock horror that greeted that announcement should have been matched with an equal shock and horror greeting the announcement of the warrior gene. And that to me is one of the perils of research, one of the perils as accepting as objective something which may in fact be far from objective, accepting as provable truth something which may actually just be a reaffirmation of old and bitter prejudices.
We decided that since the treaty is the focal point of our grievances, that we should go to Waitangi and that we should mourn by the waters. And we did. We went there and we had a passive, silent protest. We dressed in black, we wore greenery, and as the result of that protest, we were vilified by the politicians, which we expected. We were attacked by the racists, which we knew would happen. But we were also shat on and spat on by many of our people.
All this highlighted the state of the document itself. Questions were asked and the answers proved embarrassing.
They couldn't find it. And the government had bureaucrats running around like rats in a cage trying to find the treaty document. And in the end, they found it, I think, in a building in Auckland. And it had been attacked by rodents. The rats had gnawed at it to such an extent that the original document had almost been destroyed. And that underlined for us the status of the treaty at that time. And I believe it's still the status of the treaty in this time, except that the rats are attacking us instead of the document. You see, we have two choices. The first is that we can accept forever that the condition from which we suffer will always be upon us. And we just accept that the system that causes and brings that affliction upon us will always have the right to do so. Or we can fight to change it. We can either choose to live in servitude or we can change it.
20 years on, Jackson is a father and grandfather. He's still a fighter, but his tone shows resignation.
What more can they do to us than they have already done? In 50 years after the signing of the treaty, our population was less than 10% of what it had been in 1840. They had almost completed total genocide upon us, and our population is now, 155 years after the treaty, only what it was in 1840. So if they've almost wiped us out, if they have attempted to destroy us psychologically, if they have attempted to destroy our language, our culture, our heritage, our traditions, and our spirituality, what have we got to fear now? We can only improve our situation in our own country by fighting to liberate ourselves. And that's what we are doing. And the land occupations are really a very small and conservative action. But it's the beginning of the struggle to free ourselves from the racial oppression and exploitation from which we have suffered. And those actions will be nothing compared to what's going to happen in the future if the Pākehā population is unable to accept that positive change, recognition of our rights as tangata whenua must be acted upon. Because if they don't do it, then we will.
Kei ronga, Kia ora koe te kāwana.
Health to thee, old governor.
Koe a taku ki a koe.
This is mine to thee.
Kāre a hau e hokai ana, kāre rawa.
I am not pleased towards thee. I do not wish for thee.
Te Camera Kaiteke. Always was a troublemaker and complainer.
He was Heke's uncle, a warrior, and a hard man to fathom.
I te tonu he matua kia. Ia te tikanga o tōna ingoa, a kaiteke. Ai. E rangatira. E maramanaku.
Kāre a hau e hokai ana kia noho mai koe ki taku.
I do not consent to thy staying here in this country.
Me he mea koe ka noho mai hei. Kāwana nā pēa kemara ka mau ka taronatia.
If you stay, then perhaps Te Camera will be
Kā!
judged and condemned, even hanged by the neck.
Kāre rawa hau e hokai ana kia noho mai koe.
No, I will never say yes to you staying.
Koutou atou iwi. Kāre waia kia mā.
You English are not kind to us like other foreigners.
Ai, ki au hoki.
So go back.
Te kāwana.
Go back, Governor.
Kāre mātou
I will never say yes to you staying. I will not consent to thy staying.
Haere!
Go.